Hey y'all, this is BG Codes and I am bradgarropy. Recently on LinkedIn, Alex Appleget reached out to me and he was asking me, hey Brad, what kind of skills do you want to see from a junior developer trying to get their first job as a web developer? I thought this was an awesome question and I told him, hey, let me make a video about this. So I kind of diagrammed all this out and I wanted to go over it with y'all, what I think are the necessary skills to become a front-end developer. So here in Excalidraw, I kind of ranked these from what I view as like most essential to least essential and broke it down bit by bit. So let's go over it. Right at the beginning here, if you're going to be a front-end developer, a web developer, you're really going to need to understand the web platform. You're going to need to be able to tell me what the life cycle of an HTTP request is, what the difference between the client and the server is. You're going to need to know the request object and the response object and what properties those have in them and how things like headers can affect those requests. Also, you're definitely going to know how to be able to reach out to an API to grab some data or post some data to update data as well. Now, the next section is broken down into HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. These are the core three technologies that you're going to need to know to be a front-end developer. So as far as HTML is concerned, you're going to need to have a broad understanding of all the HTML elements and how to use them semantically, like what headers are used for and what paragraphs are used for and when and why to use divs and spans. You're going to need to know some specifics about the real landmark tags like the HTML tag, the head tag, the body tag. And it would be really awesome if you knew how these other tags worked when it comes to the web platform, like forms, inputs, buttons, and how powerful they can be just on their own without the use of JavaScript. And also, it would be really cool if you could tell me a little bit about new features coming to HTML, like dialog and popover and things like that. Next up is CSS. You got to know the basics of CSS. The box model is one of the most basic aspects of CSS. Talking about margin, padding, inline, block. And then it'd be really cool to understand your take on CSS methodologies, what you like to use, and why you make that decision. Knowing that kind of stuff will just show me how broad your understanding of the CSS landscape is. And of course here, you could tell me anything about new features coming to CSS. That shows me that you're really in tune with the ecosystem if you're talking about has or color functions or anything like that. And finally, JavaScript. This is the one where most interview questions focus around, so you're going to be really strong programming this language. We should talk about knowing the difference between let and const, the difference between functions and arrow functions, and then how to use all the different types in JavaScript, like arrays and objects, even special cases like maps and sets to do some real data crunching. And of course, a really tricky aspect of JavaScript is promises. If you can tell me about async, await, then catch, try catch, finally, promise.all settled, that's all great stuff. Now, the next section I think you should learn about is Git. So once you have your core programming concepts down, if you know a little bit about source control, and you could tell me your personal workflow for storing your code, that's great. Because every major company is going to use some form of version control to store their code. So for instance, if you could tell me your workflow, what add, commit, and push means, you talk to me about branching and branching strategies, what the difference between, let's say, a main branch and a development branch is. In that case, you're also going to need to know about merging and rebasing, so how to combine two branches together. It'd be cool if you could tell me the difference between the two. Honestly, I'm fuzzy on that sometimes, and why you choose to use the one you use. And then finally, at the end, if you could talk to me about if you've ever used GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket, and if you're familiar with the pull request process, which is pretty essential to large companies. Okay, now the next step up. You've graduated from basic HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. You can store your code somewhere. Now let's talk about the real technologies that real companies use to develop front ends. Most of the time, this is going to be React. So we'll focus on that. If you know about components and you could talk to me about why components are important to what React is, that's great. And you could talk about what causes components to render or how they change. So how props and state affect components. And speaking about effect, what are effects and how does React use effects? And then, of course, other special features of React like hooks. And then if you could tell me a little bit about server-side rendering and client-side rendering and the difference between the two and why that matters, that will really show me that you understand the role of a framework like React in front-end web development. Next section is testing. Every big company tests their code, so we should talk about the difference between unit testing and end-to-end testing, when, where, and how you should do these. Another major part of testing is mocking. What does mocking mean, and how do you mock APIs and data? And then finally, talk to me about the tools that you use to test code and any methodologies that you prefer. Are you a unit test guy who really likes V-test, or are you a Playwright fan who enjoys writing end-to-end tests? The next step up here is TypeScript. I do say that TypeScript is optional. Some companies haven't adopted it yet, although I would say its usage is widespread. TypeScript is definitely something that's going to show that you know how to write enterprise level code. So the main two things in TypeScript are types and interfaces. Talk to me about the difference between types and interfaces if you have a preference. Then we could talk about all the different ways to make types. There's array types, there's object types, there's union types, and literal types. Show me that you have a little bit of a mastery or at least understanding of what those are. And then finally, get into more advanced TypeScript. This is really probably not expected out of a junior front-end web developer, but you've got generics, and then you've got all sorts of utility types like records, omit, and pick functions. Now, at the end, as much as I consider this a bonus, I put a lot of weight on this personally. You can show me a portfolio with different repositories or websites and apps that you've built. I get a real sense of your abilities as a web developer. That is your best code, the code that you're most proud of, the projects that you've curated to show me. I would love to see it. And especially if you've made any byproducts like articles and videos sharing what you've learned, it'll give me a sense of how much you grasp the technologies that you're using. And especially if you can teach it, it shows me that you really know it well. And finally, at the end here is community. Again, a lot of people will consider this fluff or bonus, but this to me will just tell me if you're going to be a great developer long-term. So if you listen to podcasts, if you like learning new skills, you keep up with all the industry news, it's going to show me that you're involved and you're going to continue to evolve as a developer and get better. You're going to move from junior to mid-level to senior. So talking about any of these things where you're involved with a community or you've worked on a team is a major asset, in my opinion. It speaks to your personality. So this was a great question from Alex, and he is looking for jobs. He told me that he does have a lot of these skills. So if you're interested in hiring a junior front-end developer, check out Alex. And I hope y'all enjoy this kind of summary of all the skills that you're going to need when you're trying to get your first job as a front-end developer. I'll catch you on the next one. Peace.